Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. We're glad to have you here with us. My name is Jonathan, and I've got a friend here that it's been a long, long time since he has been on the program with us. David Zailer is actually a buddy from California, and even though I'm a Texas guy, we don't hold that against him, so we're glad that he's here. So, David, thank you for being with us.
Hey, don't forget, I'm born and bred Texas. I've been away for a while, but coming home is always a homecoming, so it's great to be here.
That's true. Well, we're going to get into something that I really am excited to talk about. But before we do that, we like to let our listeners know every now and then that we are a listener-supported broadcast, which means that the only way you're hearing us or seeing us is because we've had generous partners that have come alongside and said they want to support this ministry. And just to let the listeners know, what's amazing is that for the 12 years in the existence of this podcast. We've been a ministry for 15 years, but for 12 years we've been doing the podcast. Believe it or not, we have been in the black on our expenses every year in the podcast. So I just want to thank the listeners because we can't do that without you. So thank you for partnering. And if you're a new listener and you'd like to partner with us, just go to puresexradio.com and click on the donate button, and you can learn more about how to come alongside and partner with us. Well, David, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because we affectionately refer to you at our ministry as the 12-step guy.
Oh, okay.
And don't worry, it's not a derogatory term or anything.
I've heard a lot worse.
But the reason I wanted to talk to you is because, I think there are a lot of people in the church even that have this hesitancy around 12-step. And the reason I want to talk to you is because the second edition of my Grace-Based Recovery book is coming out later this summer. Mm-hmm. And there is this, as I was writing it, I realized when I'm trying to talk about a grace-based environment versus a performance-based environment, a lot of people, especially in the church, immediately jump to this conclusion that says, because it seems like there's a lot of really, if I can put it this way, there's rigidity to the 12-step. It's like you just do this and then this and then this and then this, and you go from this step to this step to this step to this step. That some people might think there's no possibility for grace to be part of that process. Mm-hmm. So why don't you, first of all, just give a little bit of your history briefly to let people know just even what the 12-step process did for your own life, and then maybe we can get into this idea of not seeing these things as pitted against one another, a 12-step process and the grace-based approach.
Well, my personal story about recovery in the 12 steps is that I entered into the 12-step process because I was encouraged to do so. I was in trouble in my life. I just did what I was told to do. I really had no intention of experiencing any kind of transformation because I didn't know what that would look like. Mm-hmm. The only life I had ever known was the life that I had, and it wasn't a good one, but it was all that I had. So my natural instinct was to hang on to that tenaciously, because without that life, I had no life. But my sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous, and by the way, I came to know Christ through the influence of Alcoholics Anonymous, even though I had grown up going to church all my life. Mm. I had grown up knowing Jesus from this kind of storybook, theological, let me tell you how to get your life together kind of way, or preaching kind of way, as opposed to a presence, as opposed to a relationship. Either way.
Which, by the way, is not terribly uncommon for a lot of people's experience in the church, right?
Yeah, sadly. I think a lot of the confusion comes when people look at the 12 steps from an outsider's perspective, and they look at it from kind of this critical, I want nothing to do with you perspective because you sound different. The terminology is different. It looks and feels different than what my preacher has told me all my life. And so if it feels different, it can't be good. I think that's often the assumption.
And I think sometimes people make the assumption, and I don't want to get too far ahead here, but I think then sometimes people have so much trouble with just those first few steps because it's like, wait, do not be ambiguous about the higher power.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and that makes Christians nervous. Let's just be honest.
Right. But the thing is, I think Christians have to come to terms with something here, that they can have excellent theology, but have a very practically applied atheism about their life.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they can say one thing and confess or profess something and confess something, but it doesn't play out in the reality of their life. And so God, Jesus, is essentially no higher power.
In the practicality of how they're living. Exactly.
So the point of the 12-step use of terms as God as we understand him is God is not, at its most practical level, God is not a theological term. It's a relational term. Mm-hmm. And either God is God or he's just some religious mumbo-jumbo that you're talking about.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So obviously 12-step was hugely impactful in you even coming to understand if I can put it this way, the person of Jesus Christ, not just the idea of Jesus Christ. And then from that, how did you begin to understand how to, especially when you then started getting into ministry and using the 12-step process as your tool, so to speak?
Right.
How did you begin to help others to maybe have that same kind of encounter through that process, to where it wasn't something where it's like, again, and we're going to get into hopefully helping the listeners who maybe have this idea that, listen, 12-step is sort of devoid of really spiritual things, and 12-step is just kind of rigid rule keeping, and 12-step is just performance based.
Right.
How have you helped others to maybe see that they too can find this relational presence with the Lord?
Well, over the years, the first and foremost way that I've used where 12 steps have been, I've been able to make them helpful to others is by continuing to live out the principles myself on a daily, regular basis. The 12 steps are what's commonly referred to as a spiritual program of action. Mm-hmm. And it's the action step that really gives the breadth and the authenticity to our spiritual faith. Steps 1 through 3 result in a cognitive reframing to help us understand that, at least in certain areas of my life, I'm out of control. And me, myself, and I, we are hopeless to get this area of my life in control. And step 2 is, but I believe that God can bring me to sanity, can restore me, can bring health back to me. Now that's a challenging belief. On the one hand, there's hope there, but also on the other hand, there's an admission that, I'm just not out of control, but I'm sick. Mm-hmm. And I can't heal myself. Someone greater than me is going to have to do that. Now, there are lots of higher powers. Of course, there's God, the ultimate higher power, but doctors, therapists, support groups, friends, mentors, our churches, our recovery fellowships, these are all essentially higher powers because they can do things for us that we can't do for ourselves. Step 3 is where we make the decision. What do I want? Do I want to remain in this isolated, trying to pull my bootstraps a little bit harder to get my life together? Or am I willing to trust God and some other people to help heal me? So what do I want? It's the decision. Steps 4 through 9 are commonly referred to as the action steps. They're essentially spiritual disciplines. They're really disciplines that are pulled out of the Desert Fathers of Christian tradition, where we get honest with ourselves, honest with other people, and honest with God. And so it's a transformation of relationships. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not going to be honest with God if I can't be honest with myself. Now, I can talk all about that, but there's a transparency here with myself and with God and with you. As friends and recovery partners and as ministry partners, we know things about each other that not everybody else knows, and we trust one another in that. Mm-hmm. There's freedom in that. Steps 10, 11, and 12 of the 12 steps are really these are the ongoing spiritual practices. Some people call them the maintenance steps. I don't refer to them as maintenance steps because I don't think spiritual growth has anything to do with maintenance.
Yeah, that's maintenance is like keep things as they are, right?
It's the oil change, right? No,
growth is you're moving forward.
Growth
right?
is you're moving forward. It's taking these most elemental spiritual practices and principles for life change and human health and applying them to your life on a daily basis.
I would almost, and maybe there are others that refer to it this way, but I would almost refer to those last steps as the legacy steps.
Yeah.
Because really what you're doing is you're seeking to regenerate this in other people. You're seeking to pass this along and not...
Well, that's true. I found in my experience that the passing along is something that happens naturally. And my intention really has to do with the day-to-day care of my own spiritual condition, because while I don't look at pornography anymore, and while I'm not out chasing and sleeping with a bunch of women anymore, I'm every bit as much of a sinner today as I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the most essential aspects, I think, in recovery, and it's natural outgrowth of a 12-step process is to see how God heals us in these areas of addiction and brokenness, so we can say. And yet at the same time, I've come to appreciate and come to terms with and even learn to value the fact that I'm a sinner.
Mm-hmm.
And that drives me, compels me, and it even calls me to an ever closer relationship with God.
That is a great, I think, transition to now start talking about grace, because what you just said is what grace is all about.
Yeah.
See, I think where we have a problem in the church sometimes is that we front load the gospel to a person with grace.
Right.
But we backload it with works and performance.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, actually, you know what? The more I'm actually in the presence of God, the more I'm in this relationship, the more I actually realize how sinful I really am.
How pathetic I can be.
So it's like, and so what does that mean? Then the longer I'm in this relationship, the more I actually realize and appreciate grace.
Yeah.
And I think of it when I think of Paul, the apostle, when he wrote Romans, that was 25 years after his conversion.
Right.
And in Romans 7, he talks about all this present tense language with his struggle with sin.
Mm-hmm.
The things I don't want to do, I keep on doing.
Right.
Sin is always with me.
Right.
And and then he's like, who will rescue me from, wretched man that I am? I mean, but his conclusion is the same that he had at the beginning of his walk, which was Jesus Christ. So what would you say to the listener out there that is really struggling with this idea of wanting to toss out 12-step, kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, in the sense that I can't see the possibility of God's grace being part of that process?
Right.
How would you help that person maybe understand that better? That's not the way it has to be.
Right. Well, I think that whether it's the 12-step disciplines, if you will,
mm-hmm.
The 12-step journey, if it cannot be done in a void. And just because you're around a bunch of other people does not mean that you're not in a void. One of the crisis, I think, in Christian culture, in kind of our churchianity, and you spoke about it, how we kind of front load the gospel message with grace to kind of get them in the door, to get them to straighten up and talk right and walk right.
Or just to trust Christ, right?
Trust Christ, and get them to whatever it is, sign the card or sign up for the new believers class or whatever. And then, okay, now God's redeemed you. Now continue to live like that and, stay straightened up. Yeah,
don't screw up anymore.
That's right. And, stay flying right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think many of us have actually heard people say almost those exact words to us. And we go, okay, yeah, this time I'll really stay on track. And in the back of our heads, we kind of feel the click of the hammer of the gun pulling back, like I'm getting ready to shoot myself in the foot again.
Mm-hmm. And then how safe is that environment when we do fail?
Right.
that's where then I think shame takes over, right? Because then we go, wait a second, I had the assumption that this wonderful grace of God that brings me into this relationship with this person, Jesus Christ, is now going to solve everything, and I don't have any more problems. I'm never going to fail again.
Right.
And so if that's the assumption or the paradigm that's being created in that environment,
Right.
when, not if, but when you do fail,
Right.
who do you go to?
Right.
Who?
Well, I love to go to, in fact, my world is full of people who are well-practiced failures.
Yeah. I always tell people,
I feel best around them.
I joke with some of the guys when we do our workshops and things like that. I'm like, why are we so afraid of failure? We're great at it.
Yeah.
So I think we're afraid of success. I think we're actually afraid of succeeding because that's more unfamiliar
but not
to
only
us.
that, but failure is the preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the preparation that teaches me and gives me the understanding so that when successes are developed, that's God in me.
Yeah.
That's the hope of glory.
Yeah, because then when there are successes, you know who to actually give the credit to,
That's
right?
exactly right.
And it's
Right.
yeah.
Well, and back to your question on the 12-step practice, I think people, if we look at the 12 steps from an outsider's perspective, or just, from this position of being locked in a void, if it just, because the language is different, and face it, we don't like language that doesn't sound familiar.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the toxic things about the churchianity bubble is that we kind of learn to speak a language, so we're just run a bunch of parrots that are running around parroting what the preacher said.
Right.
That we have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to learn a different language. And also learn to rub some shoulders with some people who experienced the grace of God from a different perspective in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a recovering alcoholic who's been so greatly benefited by the 12-step programs, one of their traditions is that no single individual is a spokesperson for them. So I just want to say that I'm not qualified to be a spokesperson for any of the 12-step programs. But one of the great traditions, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, is the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you can come in and, okay, you got to be sober and quit drinking by the end of your first 3 or 4 meetings. There's a huge grace there in the fact that you are included, you're welcome. You come sit next to me if you just want to get sober. You don't even have to be sober.
Right.
I don't know of anywhere in Scripture where Jesus says, okay, come follow me and leave all your sins behind, because if you don't, you're not welcomed anymore. He says, come to me and take my yoke upon you and let me teach you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the teaching, and it's the walking beside, and it's sharing the lighter side of the yoke, and Jesus carrying the more burdensome, the heavier side of the yoke, that I learned how to walk.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because when you think about recovery, we oftentimes, not in most recovery environments, we want to talk about accountability, right?
Right.
And so many times I think Christians jump so quickly to all those passages in scriptures that talk about, well, how do you correct? How do you rebuke? And all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
That then we forget that in this process, it's not, that is, we miss then the passages where, Peter comes and he's feeling so good about himself when he says, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother, 7? And he's thinking, wow, I doubled the normal standard and added 1,
right?
Because it was normally 3.
Right.
And Jesus says, no, I tell you 7 times 70, or, just he was being
limitless,
exaggerate,
Right.
And we forget those passages.
Right.
When it's, because that speaks to what you're talking about. I have had many people, even in our programs and stuff, that will make these judgments of somebody where they second guess them because they're like, you know what, I don't think this person really wants help. They come back, they keep coming back to group. They say they want help, but
and that may be true.
And it could be true.
Right.
But I really believe that our demeanor is still meant to be like, listen, if you're here in
Right.
this moment and you have a desire in this moment
Right.
to get better, then guess what? In this moment, we're going to help you with
Well,
that. And that's grace, right?
that is grace.
That is
Well,
grace.
And I would take it from kind of an administrative point in what we would call a recovery group or a support group. In Operation Integrity, we don't even use the word leader. You know what? What am I? Who am I qualified to lead? In fact, if I'm helping you, then guess what? I'm doing it for my sake. I get more from helping you, and whatever help you get from my help, that's between you and God. The value of helping someone else is the fact that it helps keep me spiritually grounded.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, Jonathan, your friendship to me empowers me. So I'll go out on a limb here. I'm not a big fan of certainly the evangelical conversation of accountability. I think it's backwards. Accountability without encouragement first is the home of the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And where we go around being police for one another. Now, my years of being kind of in and out in church as an adult, in fact, before I got sober, the last few years of me going to church, I was being dragged to church by my stripper girlfriend because she wanted me to straighten up.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into a Friday Bible study where men were going to hold me accountable, and I would tell them the truth about my life. And they would look at me with cross-eyed and like, And I would want to say to them, so you're going to hold me accountable? What are you going to do? Spank me?
Right.
You're going to tell my mother? I mean, report me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was something there was like, okay, it was powerless to help me. And at the shame level, it really just incited me to lie.
Right.
But in the 12-step programs where, it's one struggling addict helping another struggling addict, then that is literally the place where the ground is level at the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
one of the things that I wanted to say about accountability too is that when you think about what the Bible says about correcting
right.
and rebuking,
Mm-hmm.
all of that is couched within the understanding that there's already an existing vibrant relationship.
Yes.
And what we've done is we've sort of extracted some of those ideas of accountability
Mm-hmm.
and put them sometimes into environments where the relationship hasn't been established yet.
Well, it's almost like an administrative level.
Yeah, so it's kind of like this is most people's understanding of accountability. And this is where I think we start to stray away from grace, is where we basically tell a guy, listen, you need accountability in your life. And so he goes, well, let me try to find maybe the most mature Christian I can think of, at least in my view, and let me go ask them to meet with me. I don't really know them. Right. Some guy at my church, maybe go talk to an elder at the church, And so he's gracious, at least in his response, to say, yeah, I'll have lunch with you on Thursday. And so we start meeting on Thursdays. I don't know this guy at all. I don't even know what his, wife's name is. I don't know anything about him, but I'm supposed to unload all my crap onto the table in front of him. And somehow accountability is supposed to work without the undergirding of relationship. Right. And it's like, I actually want to hear, this is a little bit of a sidebar kind of conversation, but I want the listeners to hear that you cannot have real accountability. You don't have the right to speak terms of accountability into another person's life if you don't first have the relationship. Right. And so I think that's important to at least say, because it's not, again, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater saying there's no type of accountability in recovery or anything like that. But the way we go about it, we've got it upside down.
Well, and I think
because I hear what you're saying in the sense that, what are you supposed to do? Spank me? Sometimes we don't know what the process looks like, but but I think it is important to realize that if we do have a relationship, we know each other, we're doing life alongside one another, and I see you heading for the cliff.
Right.
I see patterns in your life.
Right.
Then I am actually obligated as your brother in Christ to come alongside in a way of gentleness, but also directness and say, hey, David, listen, man, I'm seeing some things and I want to share them with you, and I need to see if you're seeing them too.
Is this why I'm here, by the way?
And, no, yeah, we'll do that off camera.
Off mic.
Yeah.
Well, I hear you speak to the essential aspect of credibility. And as I work with other folks, and as we equip people in Operation Integrity, it's the training has to do with helping people find their footpath and stay loyal to the footpath that God is guiding them on. If they stay loyal on their own footpath, they will be infinitely helpful to countless numbers of other people.
Mm-hmm.
If they lose sight of the fact that their process is most essential to them, then their ability to help others starts withering very quickly. And this is one of the strengths, I believe, of the 12-step process, is that it leads to process. If people think in terms of product, then it's now some sort of commercialized endeavor, and the human experience gets trampled.
And also then it becomes just a test to pass.
Exactly.
Right? I've passed the program.
It's the boxes that have to be checked.
And that's again, circling all the way back around to the beginning, that's how I think a lot of Christians view the 12 steps is I've checked off step 1, I've checked off step 2, I've checked off step, and like you're done with it. So let me speak to that. That's because that's what they know in their own life. And that's what we've taught in the Americanized kind of entrepreneurial churchianity. Mm-hmm. Now, as you know, as my friend and ministry partner, I'm not a church insider, and I don't mean to be offending people. And I work with churches, and some of my dearest friends are clergy. But kind of it's the church kowtows to the American consumerism because we want people to show up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, butts and seats, right?
Butts and seats. And so you have to put on the show, whether it's the right kind of sermon, the right kind of, building and ambiance, the right kind of music, and the programs. And we have the 6-week evangelism class, and we have the 12-week, get your finances in order class. We have, the apologetics class. And so really our Christian training is not about life process. It's not about life journey. It's about being a community college labeled for Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's evil. And boy, I hope I'm not running your podcast here, but the issues of addiction, especially in the areas of the most intimate areas of our lives related to our sexuality. And I believe that when it comes to addiction, probably in our culture, food addictions are probably the most prevalent, and sexual addictions are right behind it. Mm-hmm. And these are connected to our most essential aspects of human beings because they're not outside of ourselves. As an alcoholic, the day I quit drinking, I started to get better. Now, the day I quit looking at porn doesn't mean that I'm healing in all the areas of my sexual woundedness, because my sexuality is bigger than just the pornography or the girl chasing. It's who I am.
Yeah.
And so the calling is not to a product, it's to the process.
And so then to wrap up here, we're almost out of time. How would you then say grace integrates into that process?
Well, there's a great saying that I had never heard in church before, but I heard it in the 12-step programs. God will do for me what I cannot do for myself. Now, there's a flip side to that, is that God's not going to do for me what I must do for myself. I have to be willing to put myself in places where other people are involved in the specific recovery process that I'm in most need. Mm-hmm. Now, if our church if one's particular church has essentially a grace-based program, and I'm always a promoter of the 12-step process to help me face my addiction to porn and to my own sexuality, then great. If not, go find the place and get yourself involved. And in smaller markets, sometimes you have to do it through an online and listen to podcasts, but start connecting with other people in the process where they are simply putting one foot in front of the other, putting themselves in the place where the grace of God rains down.
Mm-hmm. So we're out of time, but why don't you tell the listeners about your ministry, how they can get connected, and that.
OperationIntegrity.org is the website. We're actually working on a new one, but the old one's still up and running. My book on this subject is When Lost Men Come Home, Not for Men Only. This is not a man's issue.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do that's toxic in the Christian
culture. It's a human
culture,
issue, right?
It's a human issue, is we label this a man's issue, and it's, you know what, it's that's insulting to both men and women. This is a human issue, so it's When Lost Men Come Home, Not for Men Only. I have a couple of other books out on the market. You can get them at any of the, you can get them at any of the bookstores or online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to put all that stuff up on our website so that you guys can have access to it. But thank you, listeners, also for being with us. And we'll see you back here again next time. Have a great week.
Thank you so much.